All right, I want to welcome everybody to this episode 2 of Navigating Now. Today's roundtable is a very special one. We've got a handful of leaders, and at the center of our discussion are going to be topics that matter most to us as business leaders. I want to thank all of you who are joining us as part of this webinar. We have a great group of folks from across different industries. We have some great panelists. Before we get into it, just a few housekeeping items. So for today's virtual roundtable, we're going to spend about 40 to 45 minutes in discussion. For those of you who have joined the roundtable, if you have questions for our panelists, we encourage you to submit those questions by way of the chat box. We will be fielding those questions throughout, and we will make sure that there's at least 10 or 15 minutes towards the end to ask questions, whether you have one for an individual panelist or for the group, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So again, thank you so much to all of you who are joining, and let's get into it. So today's Navigating Now virtual roundtable is on finding connection in a virtual environment. And as always, my partner Kathy Ock is here to facilitate that discussion. And we have a host of leaders who will be putting their perspective forward on this topic. So I will introduce our panelists for today. First, we have Marilyn Vetter. She is the VP of Government and Public Affairs at Horizon. Welcome, Marilyn.
Thank you.
We also have Jen Dickerson, the Senior Director of Culture and Values at Takeda. Thanks for joining us, Jen.
My pleasure.
Thirdly, we have Chuck Pearson, the Executive Director of Commercial Learning and Development at Astellas. Chuck, thanks for joining us. And finally, we have Heather Munoz, the Managing Director of Technology at E-Trade. Thank you for joining us, Heather.
Hi.
So without further ado, I will kick it over to Kathy Ock, who's a partner at Thoughttium, to get us started in this discussion. Kathy?
Thanks, Anthony. I'd like to ask each of our panelists to start maybe by just saying a little bit more about the role that you play in your organization today as a leader, and any other context you'd like to provide. And then the one thing that we'd love to have you do before you pass the baton is to share one thing that has really brought you joy over the last several weeks, given the environment that we have been in during that time. So maybe we'll start, Heather, with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I work in technology development for E-Trade, working on all of the brokerage platforms and market data solutions there. I've worked with them for 3 years. It's been a very fun, interesting role in general. We have organizational development work done all over the U.S., so I spend a lot of time traveling. So I think one of the things that has brought me joy, unexpectedly so, was the fact that I am at home. It sounds strange, but when you're always on the road and always in a plane and in hotels, it is quite refreshing to always be in your own bed and have your own meals and not have it out of a restaurant. So so far, I've been enjoying this. And you got to make the best out of every situation.
Right.
And I spent a lot of time on FaceTime with my family, way more than I did when I was on the road. So I'll be using that a lot more going forward.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Marilyn, how about you?
So I lead a government and public affairs function at Horizon. So that means that I run the area that's really comprised of our lobbyists that are in the Beltway and our policy analysts in the Beltway, and then also a handful of folks across the states. So we're used to being geographically dispersed. So that has not been as much of a challenge for us, but it has certainly been fraught with challenges. But the one thing that I would say, in addition to the fact that all of my family is miraculously, for as large as my family is all safe and have had no instances of anybody being ill in my family, was getting to know my colleagues on a really more human level. You know, I think we take for granted our relationships, that we know our colleagues kind of superficially, but getting to know people through both humor, but through vulnerability and just being able to see the backgrounds in their houses and their kids fly through the screens and their dogs and things. It's been really fun to get to know people on a much more human level.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much. Jen, how about you? Can't hear.
Try this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. I'm Jen Dickerson. I head up the Culture and Values work stream for the integration office of Takeda Pharmaceuticals. And it's been a really interesting ride as we've integrated Shire and Takeda together. In terms of what has brought me joy, I think it's kind of these little, I'll call them these little signs of hope. I've been taking daily walks, as I'm sure many of you have, to get out of my house and breathe in the fresh air. And, just seeing the sidewalk chalk where people are recognizing their mail carriers, greeting their package delivery people, celebrating the efforts of our healthcare workers. So those signs of hope, as well as there are some signs of spring, even though we did have snow in Chicago yesterday. There are some, daffodils and some other things showing that warmth is on the horizon. So
Wonderful.
good to be here.
Thank you. Chuck, how about you?
Hey, Kath, good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
And good to be with everybody. Thanks for the opportunity. It's an honor to be with the panelists today, an honor to be part of this. My name is Chuck Pearson. I'm the Executive Director of Commercial Operations at Astellas. I run two teams. I run the sales training team as well as our marketing operations team. So been there about 15 years. We're right down the road from, where Takeda was. Now it's Horizon, but right down the road there, just north of O'Hare. And for me, like the others, we have two boys in college that are now home. They've been home with us for the past month. We never thought we would ever have this time with them. And to have this quality time, especially with dinners in the evening and real good family time, has been a gift. I wish it wasn't under these circumstances, obviously. I would not want that to be the case, but that has been by far the greatest part of the last few weeks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, now that we've gotten to know all of you a little bit, we'd like to jump into our first question. We'd like to get a better sense of how you have connected differently with people during this time. It's been such an unprecedented period in our actually not only our country's history, but our world's history. And I think it's really created some new opportunities. Some of them have even come out in your introductions. So Jen, maybe we'll start with you. You talked about the integration experience that you've been involved with. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how your connection has been similar or different over the last 6 to 7 weeks.
You bet. In terms of things being differently and operating in a more virtual environment, to be honest, as a company like Takeda, we operate in 80 countries globally. Every single project team I work on has people from Japan, Switzerland. And so we're very accustomed to, and we've gotten pretty good about using technology, connecting virtually. But what has changed, and Marilyn, I'm going to hit on something that you had talked about in your opening, is just we're no longer in our site offices, right? So we're sitting in, I'm sitting in my mudroom, we're sitting in our kitchens, and you do get to know more about people personally. And so it's just crazy. But this week alone, I had one call on Monday, and one of my colleagues that I've known for years had a Peloton, and I'm a huge Peloton fan. So got started on Peloton, and yesterday, this may sound stupid, but this woman I was talking to, it was in her kitchen, and over her shoulder was a thing of Lowry salt. I was like, I love Lowry salt. And so you end up finding these really weird connections with people, and you connect at a deeper level. And so I think that's the benefit of these this tragic crisis we're in, is that you do find ways to connect deeper personally with people. And I think that, I've always felt, and Kathy, I know you do too, that, deeper personal connections certainly lead to better professional outcomes. So that's kind of my experience.
That's such a wonderful example. We used to ask people in introductions to share a little known fact about themselves, and now you get to see little known facts by peering into people's home environments. It's so interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah, wonderful. Heather, how about you? I know you've talked a lot about the travel that you were doing, and now you've been much more home-based, and I'm sure that's afforded you some additional opportunity. What has connection looked like for you?
I would say that the most meaningful thing that I've learned from just being at home is I am spending a lot more time connecting with my direct reports and folks that actually I mentor But when you are traveling all the time, you think that you're going to be closer to the teams when you're meeting with them on site, but you get trapped in longer business discussions than you'd like. Here, the first 2 hours in the morning and then towards the end of the day, I either do a virtual group meeting or in the morning, I just catch up with people just to see how their family's doing. There are some people that we work with that have had family members who have come down with this. Fortunately, everyone has been recovering. And it's a much more personal relationship than I've had when I've been on the road. So I found more opportunity from doing this. When I used to travel to Europe and I was in a different time zone all the time in my prior job, I found I got very close to the team that I was with in the London location. And if I was in Belfast with the Belfast folks, because I spent extended time here at home, it wasn't the same. It was 2 days here, 1 day here. And building those kind of relationships where then, we use Slack extensively. We've built a bunch of new Slack channels that are like home, not alone. They're like channels where people just put their recipes and pictures, and there's contests who has the most beautiful thing for them. So there's a lot of folks I work with, but I had no idea how many of them were good chefs. And so I'm pinging them separately and trying to get the recipe for them. So I just think in general, what could have been, really, really hard to go through as a company, I think has been more bonding for us. And a lot of our group meetings with my directs used to always focus just on the business. And we do spend the first 15 minutes just checking in with each other and really making sure everyone's okay.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Marilyn, how about you? How have your connections with people changed? I know you said some of your team is remote, and so you're used to that format, but I'm wondering what's been different for you.
I think one of the things that's been different for all of our group, and probably from the beginning to now, it's changed pretty dramatically. So in the first couple of weeks of this, when you're in government affairs, you can imagine that it was, while it's always a frenzied pace, it was chaotic for a couple of weeks. And that was a real bonding experience for the team because we were working on really catastrophic policies and like, how do we make sure our patients are taken care of? And many of them are immunocompromised, and how can they get their medications, and how can we make sure that they're all taken care of? And how do we take care of our communities, and what do we donate to? And so it was really a bonding experience, and it kept us involved and engaged, not only from our corporate mission, but it kept us involved in our communities. Mm-hmm. And then there's just this really big decline in activity. And when Kathy and I talked about it earlier this week, I described it as a really big level of discomfort and the stillness that they feel in their lives. And it's been a good opportunity for us to talk about it's okay to not feel chaotic and frenzied, and that it's okay to take time. If you have to help homeschool your kids, or if you have to take care of a neighbor or check in on your parents, that it's okay to take care of other parts of your life. And getting people comfortable in that, I think, has been also really bonding, but it's taken a lot of time for people to really be comfortable in that. And so it was really something, I guess, didn't necessarily anticipate that people would take a while to get comfortable in the stillness in their lives. But it's been also a really good opportunity for us to connect about those kinds of conversations. Like Heather mentioned, when you have those one-on-ones, it's okay to be able to talk about those things. I think the other thing is that we're all using video, and I can't imagine if I was having to do this one-dimensionally on a phone all the time. To have the emotional disconnect would be incredibly challenging. And even thinking about, I was telling someone the other day about being on any one of our video calls. If you're typically on a conference call with just audio, you're constantly walking all over each other. Mm-hmm. When you're on a video call, you see the cue of someone's going to lean in or they're going to talk, and it's so much more productive because you're not saying, so go ahead. It's been really rewarding to be able to connect in a much more natural way that is not dissonant, like if we were just on audio.
Interesting. Yeah, it's amazing how much this experience has taken many more people into the video and audio world. Those things have finally come together in a way that I think for many people they had not before. So really interesting to hear that. Thank you so much. Chuck, how about you? How has your connection with people been different in the last 6 to 7 weeks?
Yeah, thanks, Kath. Yeah, really, I agree with all the panelists. I think there's three things that I've been trying to do as far as connection. Similar to what's been said before, one thing we started to do was a thing we call sweet and sour, where we start every call with, and it's usually a couple minutes per person, with what's been great, what's been the sweet overnight or the day before, and what's been the sour, and personal stuff, not work stuff, and really letting people connect. It sort of replaces to me the when you would go to a meeting, and we have a couple buildings in Northbrook, and you'd walk with someone to a meeting, you'd spend 4 or 5 minutes with them. You don't have that anymore. So we're just jumping into these back-to-back meetings. I'm sure everybody has the same calendar, and it gives us a chance to be human. And the second thing that I've been doing, and this may sound old school, but I'm kind of old, is I still write handwritten notes to people with an actual stamp from the U.S. Post Office. And you would be completely shocked that for everyone I send out, I get 3 emails from that person basically thanking me for their card, which isn't the reason I'm doing it at all. But the connection on that, something to do with putting a pen to a paper, writing an address, putting a stamp, and putting it in the mailbox is way more impactful than sending an email. So that's the other thing. And then the last thing is I just randomly will pick up the phone and call any of my team members just to check in, not my direct reports. It could be multiple layers down. It could be a colleague in another department. It's just to check in, not an official meeting, not a 30-minute meeting, but just to check in. So those are probably the 3 things we've been doing.
Yeah, it's so interesting listening to you. I hear a couple of themes across all of the responses from the panelists. One is, I think, kind of to what you said, Chuck, it gives people a way of making human connection beyond what they've been doing before. Even for people, as Marilyn pointed out, who've worked together for years, it creates a different kind of connection. And I know Heather and Jumbo spoke to this as well. A chance for people to learn a little bit more about each other and connect at a more human level. But then the other really fascinating thing is that it takes work, the whole world of work, and puts it in context, gives it a little bit more perspective in a way that we often don't have, because we say that people have lives outside of work, but we just don't know a whole lot about what those are. Now we're getting a view into those in a way that connects us and I think allows us to learn things in a whole new and different way. I'd like to shift into a question that is a little bit more about where you've been challenged. You talked a lot about the opportunity, and I see some wonderful things that have emerged. We want to look at the other side of that. This has been a surprise to so many of us. We've gotten thrown into a very reactive world, and people around us are operating in some very fear-based ways at times for reasons that we all understand. What has been hard, or what have you found to be a struggle during this time frame? That's the question for the second round. And Marilyn, we'd like to start with you.
Sure. I think one of the things that's probably been particularly challenging, Horizon's been a pretty rapidly growing company in these past few years. And so we have a lot of folks that don't necessarily know each other very well yet. And so now they're all working remotely and in isolation. And how do you keep collaboration and communication channels open and engaged and active? And that's probably been the one single thing that I've reminded people about, not just in the team that I work in, but all of the other teams that we cross both vertically and horizontally with is, hey, let's make sure that we over communicate right now, because what happens when people are working unchecked in their home and not seeing somebody in the hallway, they just tend to dig in and do the task, and we're not thinking about someone else should be involved or getting insights from. And we look at calendars, and everybody's calendars are plugged day to day from calls and calls and calls. So I think that's probably been the hardest thing that I've had to remind myself as well, is that collaboration in this environment is even more critical, so that people don't feel isolated, and that independence doesn't have to equal isolation. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's probably been the biggest challenge, to just remind each other that we aren't alone, and that our work doesn't have to take place alone.
Yeah. Even though we feel isolated, we don't have to operate that way.
Correct.
Yeah. Very helpful. Thank you. Chuck, how about you? What has been the biggest struggle for you?
Yeah, I think for me and for my team, we all agreed that when we went and shut down and went virtual, it seemed as if the workload went up by 75%. I mean, to Marilyn's point, if you look at everybody's Outlook calendar, I don't even know if you see a little bit of white space on it, you're like, holy cow, that person's got 36 seconds of free time. So I think it's been hard in these first 3 weeks of balancing that. So what I like to do as a leader is to help my people say, I know you want to be on all these meetings, and I know you think you need to be on all of these meetings, but do you really need to be on all of these meetings? So managing that Outlook calendar like it is the most precious thing, because time is the most precious thing. It may seem like a simple task, but I end up looking at my week and then the next day before I shut down for night and go, I thought I should say yes to this meeting. I did say yes to this meeting. Is it really necessary? And I bet you 35% of the time, I will opt out of those meetings and let someone else either be in it, so it's not redundant. So I think it's managing time efficiently, using Outlook and some of the task bars and things there than anything else.
And I also hear you talking about bringing even more scrutiny to whether or not you need to participate. I've heard about that issue from a lot of leaders for a long time. When we're there live or when we're on site, maybe the draw is a little bit different, but now we're in a separate environment and we get a chance to maybe bring a little bit more scrutiny to whether or not it's really necessary. So that's a really interesting point. Thank you so much. Jen, how about you?
Yeah, and before I go into that question, I was on a call this week, and one of the participants asked a question, and she said, are we going to be showing slides? And we didn't need them for that meeting. And she said, because I'm going to walk around the block if that's okay. And I think it's not only who participates, but how you participate. I think that we can be really creative with. In terms of a challenge, I think I totally echo what has been said. But I think one of the challenges is the need for that extra diagnostic when you're working with colleagues. So from a personal standpoint, you have such, on my team, for example, different situations. I have one employee who lives alone with her fish, and she's lonely, and that is her reality. And it's really tough for her to be home all day by herself and all night. Another employee has young kids and is trying to balance with her husband, like who's taking care of the kids when, how to compare calendars. And so you're having to deal with really unique situations with people personally. On the other hand, I'm also dealing with unique situations with people professionally, because I have a working team that's got representation from multiple business units. And so in one business unit, they're like, let's get going on this project. We've got some extra capacity. Let's rock it. Let's go. And someone else in manufacturing saying, we are so underwater right now. Our main goal is getting product to patients, and anything that distracts that is moved down in the priority list. And so you've got all of these unique situations that you're dealing with, and to navigate that, you really have to be thoughtful about meeting people where they are, to be sensitive and recognize that.
Mm-hmm. Boy, and we do this day in and day out in our normal work lives, where we try and really adjust our styles and our orientation to different people depending on the situation. And I hear that being called on even more significantly in this situation, to really understand and see where people are coming from in a more holistic way.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. Thank you. Heather, how about you? What have you found to be challenging?
Well, I can speak, I think everything that was said is exactly the things that we go through every day, especially for those who are by themselves. I personally check in on a couple people every night, because it's got to be terrible to just be at home by yourself for 5 weeks, But I think E-Trade, being acquired 2 weeks before this started by Morgan Stanley, has put a whole nother layer of stress on the teams in general. We're a small, very, very engineering focused company. We're 5,000 and they're 60,000, and so when we have meetings, it can be very overwhelming to my team. They'll literally call me and say, I feel like I was drilled. Did I answer the questions correctly? I'm like, just be proud of what you built. Like, we're the only brokerage platform that hasn't had any system issues, knock on wood, but we've really been sitting there all day and night logged in. Like, just be proud of your work and stop worrying about, they bought us for that. What's helped, I think, greatly is that our CEO and the CEO of Morgan Stanley consistently are on the news and talk about why they bought the platform and they bought it for the technology, which has helped me greatly. But I think the burden for a family to have an instability in their mind of, do I have a role? And when is this, how is this market going to hurt me personally? It's hard. So you have to constantly reiterate the value you individually bring or your team brings to the organization. And I do try to reinforce no more than 15 or 30-minute meetings. Hour-long meetings mean that people don't get up and walk around. They don't hang out with their children. They force them out of the room, because we have a lot of, at least I do, I have a lot of coworkers who have small children too. And we actually encourage them to be in the background. If they're distracting, so be it. But, like, these kids don't understand, why their parents are pushing them out of the room nonstop too. We had one gentleman yesterday whose daughter dressed him up as a king because he kept going to his office with his pajamas on. So she felt like it was more appropriate that he had a proper outfit on. But, like, it was pretty hilarious. But, we have to find stress relievers in any way we can, because I think that, at least we all have a role. A lot of people don't have a job right now. But, you can't help but once in a while think about yourself when you see what's going on in the news and the amount of things that are churned and then being bought right in the middle of all of this. It's a tough time. And I think it's the part that I am most stressed about, is just making people feel comfort as we're going through this.
It's interesting. It's like layers of uncertainty, right? I mean, the world around us is so uncertain. And then within your organization, you've got this whole additional level of uncertainty that I'm sure has people, feeling even more kind of tossed about at this time. It's got to be even more challenging.
Communication style is excitement, and I cannot be, at any point in time, I personally feel like I cannot have a bad morning. So if I wake up and I'm crabby because my dog kept me up all night, I go for a longer walk with him and get it out of my system. The last thing, I ever want to bring to the table is anything but, what's exciting and focusing on that.
Yeah. Wow. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. For our third round, we're going to talk a little bit about ways in which we've all learned to kind of cope and come along in this environment. If you had one piece of advice that you could give to our listeners today, we have a lot of leaders on the line, and we'd love to hear one thing that you can share that maybe you've learned or discovered along the way that could be even more helpful to the people listening. Let's see, Chuck, maybe you'd like to lead us off.
Sure. Thanks, Kath. Yeah, I think the first week or two were, to everybody's point, were pretty chaotic, and activity was driving the calendar. Like I said before, one of the things I started to do was step back for a moment and maybe take the week into 3 chunks. And I looked at a Monday as being my reflection, or not reflection, my performance of the week before. So with my team, Monday, how did the week before go? What went well? What didn't go well? What can we help each other with? Those kind of discussions. Tuesday through Thursday, one-on-ones, time to, spend time with each of my directs, hear what's going on with them, help them prioritize. And then on Friday was the reflection day. So I sort of broke the week up into 3 chunks. And Friday is reflection. What went well? What didn't? What are the challenges? And what can we help each other with as we go into the next week? It just seems like things are settling down, at least for me, into more of those 3 parts than ever before when we first started this, a month ago or so. So I think that's been, helpful to do that.
Yeah. I love that whole idea, the recommendation you're making. It's like taking a very unstructured new environment and bringing some definition to that. And I think there are many ways in which we've done that. And that's a great example of how you've created a routine for yourself that will allow you to make some of those distinctions and also have the perspective from the previous week or looking ahead. You're able to bring that with you and continue learning along the way. It's a wonderful example. Thank you so much. Okay, Heather, what piece of advice would you like to offer to people?
I think people, more than they even know, need to laugh every so often. I do scrape the internet all day and night in the evenings, trying to find something that's a funny clip, whether it's about the COVID-19 situation we're in, whether it's Lori Lightfoot, who is just such a she's a total badass. I love her. And and I mean, I didn't know her at all before she became our mayor. I didn't know anything about, and like, I'm like, how did I not know about this woman? And so I've just, all across the country, all of our locations, I send stuff to all my teams. I'm trying to introduce them to like what a good mayor is. But, you know, like just because they do so many clips of her and she's such a great, strict, like everyone's mom, like when you were a kid, like the really strict mom. So I find all these funny clips on her and just anything that I know might lighten up your morning that you could just put on someone's Slack channel or put on their text message. You know, just my direct reports. It depends on their personalities too, what I know they like and dislike, but I cannot describe to you how many hours I spend trying to find things that, I mean, people are so creative. It's amazing. I'm not, but I always am just so impressed and want to share what I see. And a lot of really funny things coming out of Italy and all over Europe because they're all at home too. So that's one of the things I would say is like, whatever you can do to find just small things that, you know, make someone smile for a minute. And it isn't about work, you know. I think that's helped me with the teams because now everyone, at least the ones, the channels I'm on all the time, everyone's starting to do it and they're funny.
Yeah. And I think laughter does connect us with people in a different way. So to your point, it helps us lighten the load a bit, which we all need.
Yeah,
for sure. Thank you. Jen, how about you?
Yeah, I think I'm going to use the analogy we've all probably heard 1,000 times around putting on your own oxygen mask first, right? Taking care of yourself before you take care of others. And I think in times like these, that's so important is to understand what you need to keep yourself sane and refreshed. And whether that's if it's working out first thing in the morning and making sure you hold that time sacred, whether I think your idea, Chuck, around holding time and figuring out your calendar and really thoughtful about how you want to spend your time and learning from that, you know, taking opportunities like this one with Audium, how you have created forums and taking the time and prioritizing that, because I think that, you know, this is a time where you get a chance to pivot a bit, right? And see like, how do you want to show up differently, do things differently, and being really intentional about the decisions you make with your time and your own self-care.
Wonderful. Yes. Very important. Thank you so much. Okay, Marilyn, what piece of advice would you like to share?
Well, my colleagues on the panel have all said really great things, which I think I would completely echo. And maybe the culmination of that is to make room in our lives for the emotion and the vast differences in what those emotions are. In all due respect to those employees. So sometimes in our one-on-ones with our employees, it can be humor, and sometimes it can be just, it's okay to be vulnerable and just let it out. And if I can help, if I'm just there to listen, whatever that is, I think it's allowed people to have that. But as Heather said, we had actually a leadership conversation about in the beginning, is it okay to have levity in this situation? And I likened it to when my father died many, many years ago of cancer, and one of my siblings said, how can you laugh about something that happened? And I said, because if I don't laugh, I'm going to cry all the time. And we have to have a release, and it's okay to laugh about our life or our situation or your naked kid that ran through your video conference call. And, so what we've done as a department is we've had a virtual happy hour every Friday, but we do marry it to intent. So it isn't just we get together and not, we talk about something. And tomorrow's is everybody sharing a baby picture, and we're going to guess who that person is, and then they're going to tell us why they chose that one, so that we can laugh, so we can connect, and we're creating enduring memories that when we can actually see each other again, we'll remember those things, so that when we go forward, that the memories that we take forward are actually tied to emotion and tied to really positive ones too. So I echo all of their comments, that I think just allowing for humor and any kind of emotion it's okay for us to be able to express that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I love all the points that you shared. And I'll just add one other that I know many of you have touched on, and that's this whole idea of people being vulnerable or feeling like they can be vulnerable. I think the world that we're in now has put us into that space, not only to deal with our own vulnerability, but to deal with the vulnerability of others. And so often there's not room for that in our working worlds. And, you know, we find ways to keep that out. And I think one of the things that has challenged all of us, but probably also that's connected us, is that opportunity to allow the vulnerability to come in so that we can understand people more fully and make that deeper connection. So given that that's our focus for today, finding connection, I think that is something that you've all surfaced through your comments. And it's a wonderful way in which we've been able to get to know people differently in the midst of, you know, what really could be considered a world crisis. So thank you for all your comments. I'm going to shift now over to Anthony. I know he's been sourcing comments from the people who are on the line today, and I'm sure we have a number that you'd like to be able to share with our panelists.
Absolutely. And thank you for the great discussion thus far. We do have a handful of questions, and it looks like all of them are open questions for anyone in the panelist group. So this is for anybody. If you've got something to say or something to add, we'd love different perspectives on these questions. First and foremost, well, actually, this is not a question. It's a special hello from Sharon Myzinski, who wants to say hello to Jen and Marilyn. Long time no see, Jen and Marilyn. Thanks for joining the discussion.
Hey, Sharon.
Thanks for joining, Sharon. It's great to have you a part of the table. All right, our first question. Have the panelists seen any change in team productivity, whether that's positive or negative, while making more time for extra personal interaction, small talk, etc.?
I'm happy to jump in for a second. I actually have seen a tremendous amount of productivity, particularly in light of when we've had these conversations about collaboration. They've finally had the chance to maybe step back and do a couple of projects that they didn't have time to do, that were always aspirational and never rose to the top of the heap. And so they've been now like building out teams with other departments and really thinking through, how can we better ourselves during this time? So, you know, one of the initiatives that we're doing is figuring out how can we learn more about our colleagues that work in other departments, that maybe some that are super busy we're not going to tap into, but there might be some areas that are actually in a slow time, and can they give us a window what they do on a normal basis so we can learn more about them. It gives them some connectivity to us, and it allows them an opportunity to shine where they might not have had that opportunity to connect with us before. So just looking for any kind of activity that was always in the very last page of your portfolio that you were going to do sometime and never made it a priority, being able to actually do some of those things and find meaning in that stillness, that we can actually maximize the time as opposed to allowing ourselves to get bored or complacent.
Yeah, and I'll just add, you know, as you're thinking about this question, we have another very similar question that's asking about a situation where maybe you've sensed a loss in productivity. And are you approaching situations like that any differently due to, you know, the sensitivity of today's time?
I definitely think that a lot of my development teams have had a loss of productivity purely from the fact that we're doubling down on too many meetings, which is something that we all have control of if we decide to do it. Because the amount of meetings have doubled and tripled, and they all are like, well, I can't get anything done, I'm in all these meetings. I know we can't sit in the same room, and a lot of it when you're working in Agile is all about FaceTime and having time together, but it's not an excuse for feeling obligated to not, you know, to make a choice versus having to be in everything, so that you do get 2 to 3 hours of really having deep thought. And it maybe is in the evening when your children are in bed. It's just you have to change it and you have to reorganize your day, because I can see that some people are getting quite frustrated by the fact that there's not a sense of discipline that they get out of working in a space with other engineers. And that's just from the technology side. But I do think it's something, because we're going to be at home probably through June in some locations, like we need to get better at taking care of each other and just saying, you don't need to be there. We don't need you. You need to go back and have that time for yourself.
Great point.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Actually, kind of what Chuck talked about earlier is actually being really, I went into next week's calendar and protected myself and grabbed hours of time and thought, and I just blocked it, because otherwise, if I don't, you're right, someone's just going to snag it for maybe another meeting I don't need to be on. And and I'm encouraging my colleagues and my teammates to do the same. Of if you can't find a way to prioritize yourself, that will start teaching you the discipline in order to build that muscle.
Yep.
Yeah, and I know Jen mentioned self-care. Last week I kept trying to get out at the end of the day just to get some fresh air, and I kept missing that window because meetings ran long. And I finally took 20 minutes in the middle of the day and felt like I was doing something that was going to get reported. But it was so refreshing and so much of a recharge. Just to your point about the self-care, just taking that window of time and not filling it with something else. As Marilyn said, sometimes protecting that time and doing something that can really restore us makes an enormous difference in our productivity and other people too.
Yeah, great.
Exactly. And during times like this, making sure for your direct reports that you're prioritizing them. And so if you don't already have like pre-established one-on-ones, just getting those out, just block them out for a while, just because you're going to want to have that time. And it's a way to reinforce that you're available and that they're important before everything else kind of fills in.
Yep, that's great. Thank you for the responses. We've got another question in the chat box. And it's a great question. What are some of the key learnings or new behaviors that will last through this experience and become the new normal at work? Is there anything that you're seeing now that you really feel like will stand the test of the virtual environment and become the new work, maybe outside of the obvious?
Hey,
I'll jump.
Chuck. Sorry.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Oh, no. Yeah, sorry. Was just going to say, we've all gotten better with technology, needless to say. And, my ability with technology at times can be a little challenged. So I hire people that help me out to make that happen. And, now have had to get better. So I'm working on that. I do think, I do question whether we're going to be jumping on airplanes, flying to a meeting in London. That could just be that we are now going to be on Skype or Adobe or Zoom or whatever platform. I do think people are going to question that a little closer. And then I was going to say at Astellas, we're on a Japanese fiscal year. So this could not have happened at the worst time. So we end on March 31st. We turn the page on April 1st. This all happened that week or the week before, amongst everything else. I will say that for my teams, their productivity has gone up. They've all done a phenomenal job of taking what was going to be a live event, live national sales meeting, live managers meeting, and making all those virtual. But it's been a heavy lift. And I think I have some people who are pretty much working at the edge at this point now. I'm hoping we get through this maybe another 2 weeks, and then people maybe can breathe. There are some teams, I don't know who mentioned it, that are at the tip of the spear, sorry. And, a couple of the teams I have are tip of the spear teams. So we're holding on, we're holding on.
That's great.
Exactly.
Thank you, Chuck. And Jen, did you have something to mention as well?
I was going to reiterate two things, but Chuck, exactly. I don't think, I think we've over traveled. Like we always feel like, oh, it's so much better to be in person. And we always jump on flights and I think that will change for sure. The other benefit I see is that even our senior leader, our executive team, are holding routine kind of just panel discussions with the entire organization where it's just the same format, Anthony and Kathy, that you've held for us today. It's just, you can send your questions in and they just have a Q&A with the whole entire organization of 60,000 people, whoever can join. And they're doing that much more regularly. And that's happening at the global level, but also at the functional level. And I think these kind of behaviors are really, to me, things I hope that continue where people are, I know during this time people feel the need to communicate more, but let's keep it. I think people just are feeling that much more informed, not only about what's happening within the crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, but also in business. And it's so the conversation always creeps into other topic areas. It's really helpful.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate that. Another question coming in. I'm curious to hear of an example of a previously tough relationship or contentious situation that in this new environment allowed for a reset or a refreshed approach. And, or maybe how have you shown up differently in a contentious situation?
Good question. Yeah, it's a good one. We're all kind of now.
I get along with everyone perfectly. I don't know what this person's talking about.
Contention.
It's like
That happens?
It's because you're sending like funny things to people, Heather. Everybody likes you.
I've never had that happen to me before. I think it's a lot. I think it's really, really funny. There's a few people who have felt nothing but like feeling like it's totally okay to express all of their emotions, and I think it's because they are at home. They are the people who don't do it when they're in the office. I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag of it's stressful to work at home. To not, especially a lot of the people I interact with, they manage large parts of the operational part of the organization. So they sit with each other every day and things aren't working perfectly and they're trying to give me feedback and they're like snapping at me. And I'm like, wow, that's not even who you are usually. I think I have found that when I snap, it's because I feel like someone's not hearing me. And I honestly, I know nobody goes to work every day and they're like, I'm going to just take it out on this person, right? It's just something that builds up. And I think the thing that I have found is that I've seen a lot more snapping the first 3 weeks, and now it seems to have finally have gone to a ebb and flow where everyone's like, wait, I'm not leaving the house. They keep saying the date's changing. I can't, I can't be this way every day. But I definitely think that conflict resolution is vastly different. And it is about follow-up constantly after the meeting saying, hey, emails, sometimes the worst way to communicate, like maybe you misunderstood what I was saying, or even Slack, messages can be people read into words that aren't even there. Yes. So I always think the phone and actually communication like this is a huge value where you can see someone and they're not ignoring you because you are looking at each other face to face.
How many times have we, in an office environment, had a situation where there might be some tension or some confusion, and we're able to walk away and then later that afternoon pop in the office and say like, you good? You okay? And I feel like, in today's world, now that everything's so structured with Zoom, there's so many times when we will leave a meeting and we'll think to ourselves, wow, that did not land correctly. So Heather, to your point, it's Kathy and I call it the call after the call. There are so many times when it is so valuable, and sometimes the call after the call with Kathy and I comes 10 seconds after the call ends. But that follow-up and that constant reinforcement and re-enrollment in the relationship is so critical when there's distance.
I would follow up on what Heather said too, in that, what I've seen is there's also been this huge over-reliance on communicating everything in email. And in addition to my Outlook calendar, my email is giving birth to thousands of emails, it seems like every day. And what I've tried to encourage people is like, let's shorten the emails. And what you mentioned earlier, Heather, was 15-minute follow-up calls do so much more to build trust than you send out a very long email and people feel like I just received a docudrama and now I have to deliver some kind of feedback, or I've got this huge deliverable to me. And it creates, I think, a little bit of angst. And so we've been trying to do that a little bit more of what we'll send a few bullets ahead. We're going to send up a follow-up call and create a touch base so that there's, and really hold it to that 15, no more than 30-minute calls, because we all need to check out a little bit too.
Yeah. A theme that I've heard among all of you too, I think, which does seem different, is this whole idea of checking in with people more often. It sounds like there is more of that happening, even if you're doing a one-on-one and it's 30 minutes. For the first 5 or 10 minutes, you're checking in. And I think that's really reflective of the environment we're in right now and all the health challenges that people have experienced. So maybe that's something that will be sustained, the whole idea of checking in a little bit more frequently to see how the person is doing before you dive into the work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a term, Kath, that we use, a Japanese term. It's called nimowashi, and it's the meeting before the meeting. And it's difficult in a virtual environment to have a meeting before the meeting. And that means usually what occurs is you go around before the decision-making meeting to sort of get alignment from different stakeholders. Then you bring everybody together and then you have your meeting and everybody says, oh, that's a good idea, let's go. You now have to do all those meetings virtually. And it's very difficult, very time consuming. So that is one of the challenges I think, that we're going through right now is how do you make faster, quicker, agreed upon decisions in a virtual environment?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for your responses. One of the things that was well received last week outside of the incredible dialogue was our ability to give the audience a little bit of time back to get to their next meeting, as we talked about, or the meeting after the meeting, the call after the call. So I do want to kind of wrap things up here. We had a few more questions that we're happy to send back out to the panelists after today's broadcast, but I wanted to make sure that I took time to thank both the audience, those folks who have joined the virtual roundtable, those folks who were listening in and contributing via the chat box. I want to particularly thank our panelists. So Marilyn, Jen, Chuck, and Heather, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for stepping into this conversation. We absolutely love creating a space for leaders like yourselves to have these discussions, and these discussions are extremely valuable to our community. So we really appreciate the time today and the incredible discussion. We will be continuing the discussion for our next virtual roundtable. We are here every Thursday at 3 o'clock Central. Next week, we're going to be covering off on a few topics that kind of reared their head on today's discussion: resilience and empathy during, in the midst of a crisis. How do we as leaders maintain a certain level of resilience through all the change that we are navigating, and how do we empower our teams, especially those who are at the tip of the sword, as Chuck mentioned, to instill resilience in the work that they do. So we're really looking forward to that discussion. We'll have a whole new group of leaders at the table next week at 3 o'clock. You can enroll and join the discussion at thoughtium.com/live. You can also watch previous episodes of the Navigating Now Virtual Roundtable series at the same address, thoughtium.com/live. So again, to the audience and the panelists, thank you so much for joining the discussion, and everybody have an incredible rest of the afternoon. So long.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kath.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.
See you.